Las Vegas, 1956. The desert heat was unbearable, but inside the Sands Hotel, the air conditioning hummed and the champagne flowed. The biggest names in entertainment were there. The richest people in America were there. Everyone was laughing, drinking, celebrating. Everyone except the black performers. They could sing on the stage. They could make the white audiences laugh and cry and give standing ovations. But when the show was over, they had to leave. They couldn't eat in the restaurant. They couldn't drink at the bar. They couldn't swim in the pool. They couldn't even walk through the front door. They entered through the kitchen, like servants, like they were less than human. Nat King Cole knew this routine. He had lived it his entire career. The most beautiful voice in America, and he had to use the service entrance, the man who sold millions of records, and he couldn't get a room in the hotels where he performed. That night, after his show at the Sands, Nat was walking toward the kitchen exit when he heard a voice behind him. "Where the hell do you think you're going?" Nat turned around. Dean Martin was standing there, a glass in his hand, that famous lazy smile on his face. But his eyes weren't lazy. They were sharp, focused. "I'm leaving, Dean. Show's over." "Through the kitchen?" Nat didn't answer. They both knew the answer. Dean walked over to him, slowly, casually, like he had nowhere else to be. "Come have a drink with me." "Dean, you know I can't. I know what they say you can't do. I'm asking if you want to have a drink with me." Nat looked at Dean. They had known each other for years. They had performed together, recorded together, respected each other's talent. But this was different. This was Dean Martin publicly inviting a black man to drink at the bar of the Sands Hotel in 1956 in Las Vegas. "Dean, I don't want to cause trouble." Dean's smile faded. "Nat, the trouble already exists. You not being allowed to sit at a bar in a free country, that's the trouble. You having to walk through a kitchen like you're not one of the greatest artists alive, that's the trouble. Me having a drink with my friend? That's not trouble. That's just Tuesday." Dean put his hand on Nat's shoulder. "Come on. One drink. If anyone has a problem with it, they can take it up with me." They walked to the bar together. Dean Martin and Nat King Cole, side by side, through the main room, past the tables filled with wealthy white patrons, past the executives and the mobsters and the socialites. People stared. Conversations stopped. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Dean didn't care. He pulled out a stool for Nat and sat down next to him. "2 whiskeys," he told the bartender. The bartender hesitated. His eyes darted around the room, looking for guidance, looking for someone to tell him what to do. "I said 2 whiskeys." Dean's voice was still calm, but there was steel underneath it. The bartender poured the drinks. Dean raised his glass. "To music," he said. Nat raised his. "To music." They drank, and in that moment, something was born. Not just a friendship, though it was that too. Something bigger. A silent agreement. An unspoken pact between 2 men who understood that the world was broken and that fixing it would require more than speeches and protests. It would require showing up, day after day, drink after drink, performance after performance. It would require making the impossible seem normal until it actually became normal. This is the story of Dean Martin and Nat King Cole. The story of their secret war against the ugliest part of America. The story of how 2 men changed the world without ever making a speech. To understand what Dean and Nat were fighting against, you need to understand what America was like in the 1950s. Segregation wasn't just a Southern thing. It was everywhere. In the North, in the West, in the supposedly liberal cities of California and New York. Black Americans were treated as second-class citizens in every aspect of life. In entertainment, it was particularly brutal. Black performers could achieve incredible success. They could sell millions of records. They could fill concert halls. They could become household names. But they couldn't escape the color of their skin. Nat King Cole was the perfect example. By 1956, he was one of the most famous singers in the world. His voice was on every radio station. His face was on magazine covers. He had his own television show, the first black performer to host a network program. And yet, he couldn't stay in the hotels where he performed. He couldn't eat in the restaurants that played his music. He received death threats constantly. His television show was canceled because advertisers were afraid of alienating Southern viewers. In April 1956, just months before that night at the Sands with Dean, Nat King Cole was attacked on stage in Birmingham, Alabama. A group of white supremacists rushed the stage during his performance. They knocked him to the ground. They kicked him. They tried to drag him off the stage. The attack was brutal. Nat suffered injuries to his back. But what hurt more than the physical pain was what happened afterward. Some black civil rights leaders criticized him. They said he should have been more vocal about segregation. They said he was too accommodating to white audiences. They said he wasn't doing enough. Nat was devastated. He had spent his entire career trying to build bridges, trying to prove that talent transcended race, trying to show white America that black performers were worthy of respect. And now he was being attacked from both sides. He was too black for white supremacists, not black enough for some civil rights activists. Trapped in an impossible position, hated by everyone, understood by no one. Except Dean Martin. Dean understood because Dean had experienced his own version of prejudice. Not as severe, not as dangerous, but real nonetheless. Dean was Italian, first-generation American. His birth name was Dino Paul Crocetti. When he started in show business, being Italian meant being associated with the mob, with crime, with being less than the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant establishment that ran America. Dean had heard the slurs: wop, dago, greaseball. He had been turned away from establishments that didn't want his kind. He had been underestimated, stereotyped, dismissed. He had also learned how to fight back. Not with fists or speeches, but with success, with charm, with making himself so indispensable that they had no choice but to accept him. And now, watching his friend Nat navigate a much more dangerous version of the same prejudice, Dean made a decision. He would use his position to help, not with grand gestures that would attract attention and backlash, but with small, consistent actions that would slowly change the landscape. The silent war had begun. The first battle was visibility. Dean understood that racism survived partly because segregation was invisible to white Americans. They didn't see the humiliation black performers experienced because it happened behind closed doors, in kitchens and service corridors and separate facilities. So Dean made it visible. He made it impossible to ignore. Whenever Dean performed at a venue where Nat was also booked, he insisted on certain conditions. He wanted Nat to be treated exactly as he was treated. Same dressing room quality, same entrance, same access to all facilities. At first, the venues resisted. Dean Martin was a huge star, but he wasn't worth changing their entire way of operating. Dean's response was simple. He would cancel. He would walk away from the money, from the contract, from everything, and he would make sure people knew why. The venues backed down. They always backed down. Because Dean Martin sold tickets. Dean Martin filled rooms. Dean Martin was worth more than their prejudice. One by one, venue by venue, Dean forced changes. Not everywhere. Not all at once. But enough. A crack here. A crack there. Small fissures in the wall of segregation. Nat noticed. Of course he noticed. But when he tried to thank Dean, Dean waved him off. Don't thank me. I'm not doing you a favor. I'm refusing to perform in places that treat my friends like garbage. There's a difference. The second battle was social. In Hollywood and Las Vegas, who you were seen with mattered. Your social circle defined your status. Your dinner companions sent signals about who you were and what you stood for. Dean made sure he was seen with Nat constantly. At restaurants, at parties, at industry events. He didn't make a big deal about it. He didn't give interviews about racial equality. He just showed up with Nat at his side, like it was the most natural thing in the world. People talked. Of course they talked. Some industry insiders warned Dean that he was damaging his image, alienating white audiences, associating with the wrong people. Dean's response was always the same. Nat King Cole is one of the most talented human beings on the planet. If being seen with him damages my image, then my image isn't worth having. The genius of Dean's approach was that it disarmed criticism. He never framed it as a political statement. He never talked about civil rights or equality or justice. He just talked about friendship, about respect, about treating people decently. And nobody could argue with that. You couldn't call Dean Martin a radical or an agitator. He was just a guy hanging out with his friend. What was wrong with that? The third battle was professional. Dean Martin had influence. He had relationships with producers, network executives, record labels, venue owners. He used that influence quietly, but effectively. When Nat's television show was struggling to find advertisers, Dean made calls. He talked to sponsors he had relationships with. He vouched for Nat. He put his own credibility on the line. If you're worried about backlash, use my name, Dean told them. Say I recommended it. Any heat comes, it comes to me. Some sponsors signed on. Not enough to save the show ultimately, but more than would have without Dean's intervention. When Nat was recording new albums, Dean would sometimes show up at the studio. Just to hang out, he said. Just to listen. But his presence sent a message. Dean Martin endorses this. Dean Martin is invested in this. Pay attention. After Nat's television show was canceled despite everything Dean had done, Nat was devastated. He called Dean late one night, his voice heavy with exhaustion and disappointment. Maybe they're right, Nat said. Maybe I should have been more vocal. Maybe I should have fought harder. Fought harder how? Dean asked. By giving them more reasons to hate you? By confirming every stereotype they have about angry black men? You know that's not how it works. Then how does it work, Dean? Because right now it feels like nothing works. I do everything right. I'm polite. I'm talented. I'm successful. And they still don't want me. Dean was quiet for a long moment. You want to know what I think? I think you're winning. I know it doesn't feel like it. I know it feels like you're losing every day. But you're winning. How can you say that? Because 10 years ago, a black man couldn't even perform in most of these venues. Now you're headlining them. 5 years ago, nobody would have even considered giving a black man his own television show. You had one. It got canceled, yeah. But it existed. That's a crack in the wall, Nat. That's progress. It's not enough. It's never going to feel like enough. Not in our lifetime. But every time you walk on that stage, every time you sing that beautiful voice, every time you make some prejudiced white person forget their prejudice for 3 minutes because they're too busy being moved by your music, you're changing something. You're proving something. You're showing them that everything they believe is a lie. Nat was silent. And that's why they hate you, Dean continued. Not because you're doing something wrong. Because you're doing everything right. You're proof that they're wrong. And that terrifies them. I'm tired, Dean. I'm so tired. I know, pal. I know. But you can't quit. You know why? Because there's some kid out there, some little black kid who's never seen anyone who looks like him on television, and he saw you. He saw Nat King Cole hosting a show, singing songs, being treated with respect, and now he knows it's possible. He knows he can dream. You gave him that. No one can take that away. Nat didn't say anything, but Dean could hear him crying softly on the other end of the line. You're not alone in this, Nat. I know it feels that way, but you're not. I'm with you. Sammy's with you. There are more of us than you think, and we're going to keep pushing until the wall comes down. What if it doesn't come down in our lifetime? Then it'll come down in our children's, or their children's. But it will come down, because it has to, because that's how this works. The truth always wins eventually. It just takes longer than it should. The years passed. The battles continued. Small victories, painful defeats, progress measured in inches. Dean and Nat continued their silent war. They continued showing up together. They continued demanding equal treatment. They continued proving that friendship could transcend the artificial barriers that society had constructed. In 1964, the Civil Rights Act was passed. Legal segregation was finally, officially over. Nat called Dean that night. Did you hear? I heard. We did it, Dean. It's over. Dean was quiet for a moment. It's not over, Nat. You know that. The law changed. The hearts are going to take longer. I know. But still, it's something. It's a crack in the wall. Dean smiled, even though Nat couldn't see it. Yeah, it's a crack in the wall. In 1965, Nat King Cole was diagnosed with lung cancer. He had been a heavy smoker his entire life. The disease was aggressive, advanced, terminal. Dean visited him in the hospital. Nat had lost weight. His face was gaunt. But his eyes still had that warmth, that intelligence, that depth. You look terrible, Dean said, sitting down next to the bed. Nat laughed weakly. You're one to talk. Have you looked in a mirror lately? I try to avoid mirrors. They only bring bad news. They sat in silence for a moment. Two old friends. Two soldiers in a war that was far from over. I'm not going to make it, Dean. Don't talk like that. It's true. The doctors told me. A few months, maybe. Probably less. Nat's eyes met Dean's. I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't stop. What we've been doing. The showing up. The demanding better. The proving them wrong. Don't stop. Nat, I mean it. I know I'm not the only one fighting this fight. I know Sammy's out there. Harry Belafonte, Sidney Poitier. Plenty of black artists pushing forward. But they need allies. They need people like you, Dean. White people with influence who are willing to use it. Promise me you won't stop. Dean's eyes were wet. He took Nat's hand. I promise. And promise me something else. What? Nat smiled. That beautiful, warm smile that had charmed millions. Promise me you'll keep singing. You've got a hell of a voice, Martin. Don't waste it. Dean laughed through his tears. Who's going to stop me? Nat King Cole died on February 15, 1965. He was 45 years old. Dean Martin didn't attend the funeral. That was a conscious choice discussed with Nat's family beforehand. They all agreed that Dean's presence would turn the event into a media circus. It would become about Dean Martin showing up, not about Nat King Cole's legacy. Instead, Dean grieved privately. He canceled his shows for a week. He sat in his house in Beverly Hills listening to Nat's records, remembering their conversations, their battles, their friendship. And then he went back to work. Because he had made a promise. And Dean Martin kept his promises. In the years that followed, Dean continued the silent war. With Sammy Davis Jr., who faced similar prejudice as a black Jewish entertainer. With other black artists who came into his orbit. He continued demanding equal treatment at venues. He continued showing up publicly with black friends and colleagues. He continued using his influence to open doors that would otherwise remain closed. And he never talked about it. He never gave interviews about racial equality. He never wrote op-eds or made speeches. He just did it. Day after day. Year after year. Because that's what Nat had taught him. That's what their friendship had proved. You don't change the world with words. You change it with actions. Small, consistent, relentless actions that accumulate over time until the wall finally comes down. Years later, Sammy Davis Jr. was asked about Dean Martin's relationship with black entertainers. Sammy's answer surprised many people. Dean was the most quietly revolutionary person I ever knew. He never made a big deal about race. He never gave speeches or joined marches. But he did more to change things than a lot of people who did. Because he used his privilege in real, concrete ways. He opened doors. He demanded changes. He made it normal for white audiences to see black and white performers as equals. And he did it without ever asking for credit. Sammy paused, his eyes distant. Nat King Cole once told me that Dean was the best white friend he ever had. Not because Dean was trying to be a good ally or whatever they call it now, but because Dean just treated him like a human being. Full stop. No qualifications, no conditions. In the 1950s in that America, that was revolutionary, even if Dean never saw it that way. Dean Martin died on Christmas Day, 1995. exactly 30 years after his friend Nat King Cole had lost his battle with cancer. In his final years, Dean rarely spoke about Nat publicly, but his daughter Dina later revealed that her father kept a photograph of Nat in his bedroom. Every night before he went to sleep, he would look at that photograph. "I think Dad felt like he never did enough," Dina said. "Even though he did more than most people knew. He always felt like he should have been louder, more visible, more aggressive in the fight. But that wasn't his way. And I think, in the end, his way was just as effective. Maybe more so." She paused. "Nat told my father once that the reason their approach worked was because it was genuine. It wasn't performed allyship or virtue signaling. It was just two friends treating each other with respect and demanding that the world do the same. That authenticity couldn't be faked, and that's why it mattered." The story of Dean Martin and Nat King Cole is not a story about heroes or grand gestures. It's a story about showing up. Day after day, drink after drink, performance after performance. It's a story about using whatever power you have, big or small, to make things a little better for the people around you. It's a story about friendship that transcended the ugliest parts of human nature and proved that connection is always possible, even in the darkest times. Dean Martin never saw himself as a civil rights hero. He would have laughed at the suggestion. He was just a singer from Ohio who didn't understand why the world made things so complicated. Why couldn't his friend eat at the same restaurant? Why couldn't his friend use the same entrance? Why couldn't his friend be treated with the same dignity and respect? The world's answers to these questions made no sense to Dean, so he simply refused to accept them. He refused to participate in a system that dehumanized people he cared about. And in that refusal, in that simple, stubborn insistence on treating people decently, he helped change the world. Not alone. Never alone. Nat was fighting too. Sammy was fighting too. Thousands of people, black and white, were fighting every day. But Dean did his part. Quietly. Consistently. Without fanfare or recognition. That's the Dean Martin story that deserves to be remembered. Not the songs, though the songs were beautiful. Not the movies, though the movies were entertaining. Not the Rat Pack, though the Rat Pack was legendary. The man who sat down at a bar with his friend in 1956 and refused to let hatred win. The man who made a promise to a dying friend and kept it for the rest of his life. The man who proved that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it just shows up, day after day, and does the right thing. That's Dean Martin. That's the silent war he fought. And that's why his friendship with Nat King Cole matters. Even now. Even all these years later. Because the wall they were fighting against still exists. It's smaller now, cracked in places, crumbling in others. But it's still there. And it will keep crumbling. One act of friendship at a time. One refusal to participate in hatred at a time. One drink at a bar at a time. That's how walls come down. That's what Dean and Nat taught us. That's their legacy.